things, but also some general points that come out of this session about things that we've learned from the past, but also ways forward. So, any questions or points about Ian's talk?
I thought it was very good, just to say.
Thank you. You want to pat my head?
Oh, and it's enjoyable. Those do something more about it.
Well, I'll make the point that I was making to you, Ian and Jeff, about whether there's a kind of part of the language thing is the issue, and it does come up a little bit in that Savage book about there almost being a discourse that comes out of London as a metropolitan language, that you don't get the same kind of, it's Ruth's point about nuancing again. I mean, we have the same kind of language being used by the political class, but there does seem to be a particularly strident kind of use of it in what comes out of Teach First, which started as something that was London-based, and the other examples that you used. So it's part of the kind of London effect.
But Ian Duncan Smith is the person who's hijacked the word social justice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think there is an issue about
and
this.
that's where I think
You don't get the same language, it seems to me, coming out of the other jurisdictions, but also other parts of England, I think. There's something about the metropolitan political class, but also movements like Teach First that started as very much a London-based version of Teach for America. That develops a particular way of, a particular type of discourse.
The shift from equality to equal opportunity was a Blairian move, quite definitely. So the result, I mean, the foundations were laid there for something much starker that came after. And one of the things that strikes me about this, one of the questions we faced in writing the book, we spent a lot of time on this notion of poverty and class before we got into the education thing. And it was, the question is, one big question is, why are we now talking about poverty when 30 or 40 years ago the sociologists referring to the same experiences and questions and problems would be talking about class?
because nobody says they're from a working class background.
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think ideologically poverty works in different ways than class. It's got no sense of agency to it. It's a sense of just harmless victims who but are themselves to blame, you know, in one explanation. It's got a sense of it's got no complexity to it, no depth to it, no history to it. All sorts of issues. I think why it serves them to our rulers to use one term rather than
I'm not sure they do use poverty.
No, that's
that
what I
much.
said.
They use disadvantage
Disadvantage.
and deprived.
Deprivation.
Those are the words that come to the top all the time.
And for Blair, it was social exclusion.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I mean, one of the things that has puzzled me is, do they believe their rhetoric?
Yes.
Do they believe that this is the way to do it?
Go
Or, as my daughter, who's a strong trade unionist, says, for the higher education, something for excellence, she says all that is undercutting national agreements. That whole white paper, you know, the higher education white paper, is about, it talks about teaching for excellence, but it's about undercutting national agreements for salaries and so forth. Now, that she interprets it's a deliberate tactic to use these words to mean something else. Do we agree with that, her, or do we say that Nicky Morgan actually believes that academising everything is actually, do they believe that?
Well, I think it's more than semantics. I mean, I'm an internationalist, I'm not a nationalist, but I mean, I think the way that kind of Scotland has reacted to this increasing sort of metropolitan use of language coming out of London, it's part of where Scotland's going. It's part of where, in Wales, we still feel, in a sense, we have a completely different way of talking about the world. And I find that civil servants in Wales, you know, where they have to work with civil servants in London, have exactly the same kind of view, that they just can't have a conversation with people when they're talking about welfare reform. They spend all of their time trying to, because that's not devolved, trying to unpick what the civil servants in London have to do to serve their political masters. But they find they can't have the same conversation with them. So I think there is a question here of language, which you picked up on using, Raymond Williams's approach, which I think is quite interesting in terms of, does the discourse that you picked up on there, which I think essentially is a London metropolitan discourse, does it exist in some kind of abstract way?
Can I just say one thing about Teach First? The thing it struck me that it was awfully like is in the late 19th and early 20th century, the public schools and Oxbridge had settlement houses. And I think Teach First is a kind of, nobody expects them actually to live in the neighbourhoods where they're teaching, or live communally. It's not like Hull House, where you should be a group of spinsters living in the ghetto.
It's very much so.
But it is.
I mean, I've actually written about that parallel.
Oh, good.
And it's the first thing. Well,
Yes.
it's only a footnote actually in a paper on.
Which I should have read and haven't.
Well, no, it's not. It's not. It's a paper in Cambridge Journal of Education, which is quite an obscure journal.
Especially when you're sitting here.
But I mean, the parallel is so strong.
In other words, so just like Chicago, where the Chicago pioneers went and lived, the women went and lived in Hull House,
Yeah.
and Toynbee Hall and the
Yeah.
equivalents. So it's that ethos, because that struck me, you see, as being a
Missionary,
very,
yeah.
yes, mission to the,
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
it is. Because I wonder if that isn't something that mightn't be, if somebody could write something actually clever about that for, say, the Times, people might notice it.
Well, that's the point. I wrote it in the footnote. I should have been a public intellectual, as I was
Yeah.
arguing.
Yes. Well, perhaps that would be very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what? So what? I mean, okay, so they're parallels. Would they think it's still a good thing?
Well, it might be, if you take some of the research, I'm putting research in quotes, that Polly Toynbee work about some of the people working in merchant banking in the city who didn't seem to have any sense of social engagement or social responsibility. I think actually some argument about, if we are going to have social exclusion, actually people who are earning a lot of money have some duty. And actually I don't think it would do any Russell Group graduate any harm to do Teach First for a couple of years, because they would learn something about a society they've otherwise, most of them, never met. I'm not saying necessarily, I have no idea about whether it does any good for the schools, but they might have an experience which would widen their understanding of the society they live in a way they don't get it now.
One of the interesting things. One of the interesting things we were talking in the small group earlier about where Teach First graduates go.
Yes.
And of course, we can present that as a failure, because even though they quote sort of 60% staying in education, when you actually drill down to them going in, staying in the schools they were in, staying in disadvantaged areas, staying in the public education system, going into education consultancy and so on, or being school governors, all those are included.
Fast-track to Hitchens.
Yeah.
2 years.
But, I mean, the more positive side is that both Teach First and Teach for America were predicated on, after 2 years, them leaving and going into the city. Now, I don't know in terms of your argument whether it's a good thing they didn't, because it means that particularly sort of group who are expected to develop social responsibility through the scheme are no longer going into the city, and maybe that's a bad thing. But I mean, in answer to your question, I don't think there's a simple answer whether it's a good or a bad thing. The answer is very nuanced.
I'm not going to bash Teach First, because I actually wound up being the West Midlands lead for the history cohort for Teach First. And I can look back over the 9 young men and women that I worked with, and half of them are still in teaching, and none of them are in middle leadership, and that has been their decision. And the other half have gone back into business. And one has written an incredible blog supporting Michael Gove, which actually makes my skin crawl. But,
Impact.
and he's very good at it, and we knew he was doing it as he was going through his training. One of the issues, though, with Teach First is that while they should go into schools and while they should engage with communities that they do not know, 2 years in a classroom where somebody has had very little training and whose constant mantra during the summer Teach First summer school is, give me the top tips for teachers, is problematic. And that's where I think the issue with Teach First comes in for teacher educators. Most teachers will say it takes not a year as an NQT, but several years to understand what the hell you are doing in a classroom. And yet we're saying they're going to go in, all they know is the top tips, and then they're going to move out. I think the other thing that's not challenged about Teach First, it's an American who founded it here. Why has nobody challenged that? Why is the American voice coming home to talk to the mother country and saying, we're going to change your education system? Why has nobody said to Brett Wigdorts, actually go home and change your own? Because that one's in as much mess as it possibly is. The other thing with Teach First is that on its 10th anniversary, it talked about where it was going to be in 10 years. And nobody challenged that as an educational charity. They should be able to say in 10 years' time, we should have done the job, or we should get out of the business because we can't do the job we're promising.
Colleague behind.
Can I come back to Gabby's question about do government believe in the rhetoric about mass academisation? I think if you probably got Nicky Morgan or even Michael Gove in a dark room and asked them to speak totally off the record, they might say, actually, well, not as much as you might think, because actually there isn't a great deal of evidence to suggest yet that academisation is actually making any difference. Personally, I don't think changing structures and governance is actually a great school improvement strategy in any case. I think the real agenda with academisation is to remove as far as possible any element of local authority involvement with schools and taking out that local democratic element that exists. Sorry? Yeah, we're part of the same
but
sort of
they
process.
do, I think you can argue bad faith, but they actually believe that destroying national agreements and getting rid of local authorities is the route to improving education.
Whereas,
in a dark room, I don't think they deny that.
Yeah, but okay.
I mean,
but in
there
which
are
case-
those who support them,
In which case, I think
who
it's
have other
stupid.
motives, but I mean, I don't know Nicky Morgan at all. I know Michael Gove a bit, but I mean, I think he does have a naive belief in some of this stuff.
No, maybe he does, but I suppose I think he's wrong, and I think
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I think he's
You know, you read Warwick Mansell every Tuesday in the Guardian. I mean, he very helpfully picks at the underbelly of the whole academisation thing, because there are plenty of faults with it thus far already.
Well, I mean, the logic behind it is the market in education very clearly. Because the market means follow that logic and some will fail. And that's what they do. They wait for schools to fail and they shut them down.
So therefore, trying to get what have you said, all low-income children to succeed is a bad promise in the market relation, because you can't promise that. I mean, just to say that Sweden, I mean, it's very interesting in the Swedish context, because Sweden, when I was there, had a very strong social democrat system. It was a unified system, and it was quite, I mean, if you believe in the league tables, it's quite high on the league tables. And then the moderates of the Tories came in, and they brought in a market in all the towns, a really strong education market, and created free schools that actually got were for profit but were funded by the state. And the whole in the cities, there's a total aggressive marketing of schools, which is very it's not very attractive. Of course, in the rural areas, they can't, because there's only one school, and it's destroyed the school system, and they've gone right down. And the Social Democrats are now in a fairly weak Democrat regime, but they can't, because it's so much money and business involved. it's very difficult to roll it back. So it's his. So if any experience demonstrates that the market is wrong, it's in Sweden, and yet, of course, they don't look at that, do they? Well, I haven't heard Tories talk about it.
Well, they did quote Sweden for a time.
Yes.
When it looked at it,
The free schools were
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
And the companies are just closing down if they don't
Yeah,
get
I
profit.
know.
So there was kind of, was it?
I did have a sort of Terry and me were talking, this idea that there is a market, or a sort of marketised view of education, and I agree that there is, this is an ideological position, and they do sort of think that by removing the structures of local authorities, they're kind of creating a competitive environment. And I think you can also say that to a certain extent they think the same of children, that they will succeed and fail. And the rhetoric about social justice is to a certain degree a lie, because they have in their heart of hearts, in my interpretation, a belief that there are some people, that's why they talk about worklessness, life chances, that there are some people who are irredeemable. But they will never say that. They will never ever say that. And you couldn't even get them to say that in a darkened room. But I think that is the kind of thing that underlies. I think that is the kind of thing that underlies it, and that's why you have increasing use of schools where you get musical aptitude to enter. But what's aptitude if it's just not an inherent quality in a child that you can read through some test that tells you that?
That manifesto that Dominic Cummings wrote,
Yeah.
that was did actually expose that whole rationale. Although it was never officially published, it became available, didn't it? But it was
IQ testing.
Yeah, and it was an inherited intelligence kind of argument.
Exactly. I think it's very much at the fringes, and it's sort of I'm inferring that rather. But I think that does exist, that quality.
Can I come in, please, while we've got our retired colleagues with us, with the purposes of drawing on a lifetime of professional experience to plug into our BERA Commission. Coming in to England from Australia, albeit 10 years ago, one of the things that struck me is how quiet it is in the public arena. And I look here, Ian, your second bullet point, we should bring edge to our analysis of policy and to politicians' contributions to education and debate. Who is the we, and where is that edge rehearsed, other than in perhaps research reports and journal articles, and who reads them anyway? That,
Can I? I've got to go now, but I say what I said to you is, if I were a commission, I would try and raise my own money through the trade unions or from anyone else. I'd become independent of research assessments and just go for it, and because I think if you start getting involved with all the kind of surveillance kind of research procedures, you won't get anywhere, and so that would be my advice. But
well,
it's
one of the
not
things that strikes me, this was a headline when a Leeds primary school teacher resigned a fortnight ago. Appalling and immoral school reforms have driven me out of my beloved profession. A Leeds head teacher. And it went viral, but there has actually been a sort of a silence around it. And my coming into England, perhaps after working in Australia, in what we called the public education lobby, is that it's so polite. There's such a timidity, a passivity, like all these things, like who is actually engaging in the professional conversations? Because I've been told in my place of work, a faculty of education taking responsibility for teacher education, and I've suggested, can we have a conversation about teacher quality? No, we don't do that here, Laurie. We don't talk about, we've had that conversation.
Well, they close people, you're called a troublemaker and they close you down.
Indeed. But
So
if a faculty of education responsible for teacher education is not talking about teacher quality, where do we have it? And that's what I want to hear from these good people. Thanks, Gaby.
Yeah,
And
just-
thanks, Sarah.
And just as they're going, because I know because they are going, and they've got taxis running. I just want to say thank you very much to all four speakers who came out of retirement. They're not really in retirement. They're all stage of retirement. They're going around the world working.
I'm still doing a day a week.
And Sarah's working. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Take care. Bye.
Can we have some discussion about that, because I think it's a really important one, like where does the debate happen? I would have loved Gaby and Sarah to reply. Does it come down to the teachers and the academic unions to host the public debates? Is it BERA? Is it USET to go to do it publicly? Albie, research informed, collective intelligence, plugging into policy discussions.
I'm not sure. There is you mentioned it earlier, I think, social movement, trade
Unionism.
There have been, I mean, the NUT's hosting, or at local division level, hosting various sort of, they were education question times, and now they're kind of framed around testing and the white paper, as it was. So that's happening, and that's happening sort of locally, but I think it's difficult to direct that. It has to be, I mean, if it's social movement, trade unionism, that has to be something that's kind of organised locally, and I think that's going to be stronger. The more that they can, those local meetings can engage with academics, I think the better, really, to have them on a platform and to be informed by academic research. I think that's good for sure.
Terry and I both attended the NUT conference in Harrogate last year, and honestly it was music to my ears to hear so many teachers come up to the microphone taking 4 minutes each, really speaking so thoughtfully, considerately, cogently about hot topics, if you like, a term that we seem to be using on BERA Council. But how does it get out of that auditorium and into the public arena? You know, what happens in schools? We know that unions themselves are demonised, but how does that very good professional intelligence that is rehearsed in that auditorium and invariably carried unanimously, which incidentally is how it works in Australia, and I'm not saying it, I mean Australia's in the same boat because it is global and following the mother country, but how do we orchestrate a public debate about policies that you know, on the ground so many people express disquiet? We have head teachers who resign because of it.
I think part of the answer is that it's not linear.
Sorry?
Or it's not linear any more than pupil learning is linear. It's, you can develop a strategy, but it's not predictable. I mean, one of the interesting things recently has been all the stuff that a number of us were doing 3 years ago about Gove's national curriculum placing far too many demands too low down pitch and so on and so forth, suddenly re-emerges at testing time, and this outburst of parents who, after all these years, say enough is too much, you know, too much is too much, and without particularly realising that these excessive demands on their children at testing time and in preparation for tests are related to the curriculum formation. And so one of the things that, you know, Reclaiming Schools has been doing as a sort of independent network of academics that's been trying to mobilise research for these purposes is feeding back a summary of these curricular arguments to the parent groups who are protesting, and suddenly we have 2,000 reads for each of 2 blog posts, you know, recalling all of this and connecting it. And 2,000 reads is minimal, but it's about 1,990 more than a lot of academic research papers receive. So it's complex, isn't it? And we're fighting against hegemonic, you know, false thinking and so on, and in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think professional contexts are important, but I think you need a broader social grouping to be involved in these debates, because of course one of the strategies of government is to turn parents and the community against teachers if things go wrong. I mean, I was talking to someone from China the other day, and they were saying how wonderful it was in England, and in China they're not allowed to criticise policy. So they have to criticise teachers, not because they think teachers are doing anything wrong, but they can get away with writing that. And then I sort of thought, yeah, well, we're not that different. So you need context where you need to avoid teachers just being seen as a self-serving group, because all the neoliberal rhetoric, if I can use that expression, is anti-profession, and so what I'd love to see, and I am shocked to see that it hasn't happened, that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn doesn't seem to be there at all in the debates.
So that's what the point I was going to make. In this, if we accept any validity to the notion of parliamentary democracy, the one group you didn't mention in your list of places to bring about influence is political parties. And surely that is what we're led to believe is how our democracy works. I mean, somehow we elected this government that we've got at the moment. If we want an alternative education policy, we should be working within alternative parties to bring about influence. And I mean, I rejoined the Labour Party for the first time for many years after Corbyn got elected as leader, because I thought we might see something different, but so far we haven't. So maybe that means I've got to start going to branch meetings and start raising all good questions.
And join the Socialist Education Association if you're there already, because I attended their annual meeting, which was held in Cardiff last Saturday. I spoke at it, and actually one of the people there, one of their officers, whose name I can't remember, I think he's from London, made the point, actually, in terms of this discussion, that fair play to Michael Gove, and he said, I've never said that before. Gove prepared for government. He got a group of people around him, Cummings, Friedman. What was the centre that he was involved with strongly, Jeff? The Gove Centre? Policy Exchange. Got a group of people around him. They developed a narrative. They did a lot of work, and they hit the ground running. None of that is going on within the Labour Party. It's not going on within the Corbynite Labour Party, and it wasn't going on in the Miliband.
Well, there are some attempts, I believe, by the to talk to their education team.
Yeah,
we have a much better relationship with them than we did under the previous, well, before Corbyn. I think, I'm not in the parliamentary team, but I think it's a question of the particular people we have in education at the moment. Probably Corbyn has a much more radical, critical, but it's not his. It's not the only thing he focuses on.
No.
There have been some encouraging things. I mean, that sort of come out from Lucy Powell's office, but you're totally right, and it's not fully formed.
That was his
critique.
analysis, and then I think it's almost like, where do we find the public space, the political space, to be these public intellectuals that Jeff articulated so well? Because even in a small country like Wales, I don't have a solution. I mean, I still go back to the kind of places that Jeff talked about this morning. I get beguiled to go back to working inside, the system, sitting on boards and advisory committees and advising ministers and so forth, and then work with the teaching associations, and then work with my own community, the academic community, and try and work with local authorities as well, because we still have them in Wales. But there's nothing new about that. It's the same old channels, and there's no particular space. I mean, I think those of us, John Furlong would say the same thing, Sarah's gone. We feel that in many ways, Wales is very anti-intellectual. It's gone through a phase, particularly in the education arena, where it's become very anti-intellectual. It's been a funny effect of devolution. So even in a small country, it's difficult to find a space where you have the kind of debate we've had today, which is why I come to Oxford to have it.
Don't forget Oxford's part of that metropolitan elite that you...
Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Well,
if you read those books, I
well,
think
no,
you'll
but
find
what Savage says, the most, I don't know if you have read it, but the most interesting thing I found about Savage is in university terms, he argues that the Golden Triangle is gone. That all the evidence is you go to university in London, any university in London, and that Oxford, Cambridge do not have the same effect, and none of the other Russell Group, in terms of your potential, if you stay in London and South East, to gain reasonable employment that will take you out of poverty. And I mean, he calls it the vortex of London. And I think that's all part of, not anti-London, but I think it's sort of anti-metropolitan.
But at the top level, it's definitely the Thames corridor.
Well, that's their analysis.
There are all here. Buckinghamshire Prep School,
Oxford's a bit like
Oxford Union, Eton, the City of London. It's all down the Thames.
I hate to break up a really good debate, but I'm going to have to, because I know people are going to have to brush through it. Thank you to everyone who's come in. Those of us who are able to spend some time, we're going to chat to Daniel now, and safe journey back, everyone.
Thanks for organising.
Thank you.